Well, thank you, Kim and Saeed and Elizabeth, for your initial comments and presentations. I'd like to begin with the audience and see if there are any outstanding questions. Yes, Matt.
I just had a question about, you talked about that the third phase, or the last phase would be more continuous. Do you envision the digital aspect of this, continuing to grow and progress, whereas the book would be more static, it would be printed in time, so to speak, but that the digital component will continue to mature and grow?
Yeah, I mean, the short answer is yes. And I'll refer to it, or I'll try to explain it as a concept that I heard recently from Phil Bourne, who's the Associate Director for Data Science at NIH. He cited a book called Pipes versus Platforms about new business models. I haven't read the book that launched this yet, but it's a very interesting concept. So pipes being linear flows, television, you create something, you push it out to people, they watch it, they consume it, you're done. Maybe there's reruns and so on, but that's the premise. YouTube is a platform. So it has this interactive, iterative, continuous nature where people not only consume something that's been produced and pushed out, they can actually contribute to it, they can comment on it, they can point to different things and so on. So that's really kind of what we're envisioning is a platform that continues, and there may be spikes in interest, there may be new types of content that come out. The library, for example, has a collection of African-American postcards that we've digitized. There may be connections between that content and this content, or these books. The books themselves may start to make connections between books. The authors may say, here's a thread that you can follow between these books. So those are the kinds of things that I think might continue over time.
Just continuing in that vein, because I think you raised some really interesting possibilities about how this becomes dynamic and social and interactive and has a life beyond the first iteration of the idea.
Could I ask you to speak, to come to the mic, because Kim's remote, and I think she'll hear better.
Okay, so just to repeat, I think you've raised some really interesting points about kind of the life beyond the first iteration and what that looks like in terms of not just a technological experience, but a social experience. Right. And I'm incredibly impressed by the collaboration that probably not just you folks have mentioned, but some of the other things that we're seeing at this conference. One that really jumped out at me from your presentation, and I don't know that I have heard, at least in the sessions that I've been in so far, but where there is huge technology development is the museum sector, in immersive environments, in the kind of VR experiences that we know are here now and being used very much in museum environments. I'd just be curious to hear if that has crossed your thinking.
Yeah, really good point. And I think the choice of, I'd like to say we thought about Emeka up front and we were brilliant and visionary, but that's simply not true. The reality, but I do think that's the kind of decision or epiphany you can have in this creative process, sort of having this creative tension between partners. But what Emeka will allow us to do in many ways is think about exhibits, or the way in which museums typically contribute content and collections and services and so on. And I'm very new to the publishing world. But my sense is what typically happens with books, at least with the print books, is the press, of course, has to keep publishing books over and over. There's a spike that they have in terms of resources, time, energy to devote to something like this. But we'd like to be able to keep raising that interest or exposing it or leveraging it because it doesn't go away. It's not as if the time when these books are sold is the only time there's interest in them. So are there museum exhibits or events or anything that can remind everyone, prompting one, hey, there are these books out there that you might want to buy.
And even in terms of having a printed book that is kind of a static object, the digital nature of the material and the way that Kim and Saeed have put this together means that you can revisit these ideas in these short format books. I'm reminded of the new reboot of Roots that everybody's been watching, and how this is a theoretically static book that has come into a new interpretation. And so I think that this particular project lends itself to that kind of re-examination of material over time.
Before we go on to the next question, Kim, did you want to add anything to that remotely?
I'll wait for the next question and jump in. Thank you.
All right. Well, feel free to let us know if you have something to say. We can't see your hand signals.
Okay.
All right. Can you
I
get,
have a question about Project Muse's involvement in the partnership. We have quite a few of the Project Muse collections at my library, and I'm right now having trouble picturing the Project Muse platform as it is now, being able to deliver up a lot of dynamic content like you're describing. So I'm wondering if a likely outcome of this is going to be a prompt for Project Muse's platform to develop in more interesting and innovative ways as well.
So Kim, the question is really about Project Muse and what role they might play and their ability for their platform to be able to support this. So I just be very clear, I don't work for Muse, so I don't represent them. Elizabeth's closer to it, but also doesn't work for Muse directly. I have been involved with Muse for many, many years. I've been on their advisory board, so that's the perspective I can bring. What I can say is that they had and have finished a planning grant with funding from the Mellon Foundation to look at something called Muse Open, which would basically be their platform and business model around open ebooks. So that would be an obvious place where this might fit. That's actually where the connection happened. They said, we're already thinking about this. So if you have ebooks, even if they're open access that are publications of the press, we are the platform for delivering that. In speaking with the people at Muse, what I basically said is we are prototyping. We're giving you an opportunity to see what types of things you may wish to support without necessarily saying you have to support them. So I think that I do a lot of work around software development, and I'm a big believer of use cases. But I'll say that use cases are really about translating requirements and understanding. We're trying to build a shared understanding here, so that it's not translating from one group to another, but everybody basically agrees and understands what this is. So for Muse to be involved from the early stages, I think will be very helpful.
Kim, did you want to comment at this point?
Well, my background on Project Muse, as you might imagine, is very limited. I can say that I'm excited about the prospect of being an open Muse. But at this point, I would have to agree with Saeed that it's very much evolving and still remains to be seen of what that might look like.
And just one other point to reinforce, we will work off of their final, quote, EPUB output. So we're going to start from where they would basically end in their current instantiation. But where they will go, obviously, we'll hope to inform.
Saeed, I have a question for you. When you were building your linked data model, how did you set the parameters for and the scope for the volume size of the links that you were going to include?
Yeah, that's a good question. So if you really want to bang your head against the wall, get to know linked data. And the fundamental, if you will, concept in some sense around linked data is a data model. So very simply, what kind of data are you dealing with? How are they connected to each other, both in terms of the structure, but also in some sense the semantics. The really big breakthrough, we hope or believe with linked data will be that machines will eventually be able to make inferences and connect things that we would have otherwise not known. So through the RMAP project, and this reflects many years of building up to this, the data model has four basic concepts or entities. One is an agent, and that is someone or some machine doing something. One is a resource, and that is something produced by an agent. The third is an event, and that is something has happened around those resources. It's been produced, it's been preserved, it's been cited, it's been connected. And then the fourth is assertions. So we can make assertions based on things like DOIs, we can make assertions based on metadata, we can make assertions based on a lot of different things. And that's all they are. They're not facts, they need to be verified, they need to be made clear. Example I'll give you is if you went to the presentation where Resource Square spoke, they talked about how creating YouTube videos have apparently raised the number of citations for their articles. And the YouTube page basically has the DOI for the article. And you could potentially put the video link in the article itself. So what these linked data graphs basically do is do that automatically. And in that case, it's a direct connection because they know those two things are connected. But these linked data graphs basically make those assertions over time based on just that data model itself. If you had a different data model, you get a different graph, but that you have to sort of buy into the data model, I guess.
Looking at the audience to make sure I'm not missing any questions from you all. I'm also curious about the budget process for how this evolved, since some of the content's open access, some of it is meant to be sold. I imagine it must have been challenging to come up with a budget model where you're actually projecting revenue.
I think we're still coming up with that model, actually. I mean, I think that's still a work in progress. So,
Yeah, I mean, I think in the spirit of risk-taking, this is another theme that I keep hearing about. I'd like to think this is responsible risk-taking, if that makes any sense. We're trying to make sure that we respect the existing constraints and realities, but also taking a leap of faith that this is something that could lead us to those kinds of observations.
And in terms of the number of different tools and resources that were used for this, you referenced Omeka, which is a platform, but how many do you envision? I mean, I picture a lot of moving parts. When I think about this model, it's not just a book, it's not journal, it's a variety of resources in different locations and different formats.
Yeah.
What types of, do you have to, are you thinking that some tools may need to be created to make this work, or are you able to identify the resources that would be necessary?
Yeah, I think we would strongly prefer, to work with tools that exist. There's a fair amount we can do on the margins by using existing tools. Original software development on the margins is really bad. As someone I know once said, there's nothing more expensive than cheap software development. So we really want to avoid original software development. But I also think it's really important to point out, in addition to the tools and the standards, a lot of things we talk about are really web standards. If you go to the World Wide Web Consortium website and look at their standards, it's phenomenal how well those standards are designed, developed, and described. A lot of the things we describe as standards are actually just a modification of a web standard. So I think as long as we stick to those web standards, we'll be in pretty good shape.
And Kim, I have a question for you as well.
Okay, great.
When you're thinking about the pedagogy around this resource and other potentially related resources, how are you envisioning, or what's the, again, kind of breadth and scope of your thought processes and engagement with others in terms of identifying applications, identifying, Saeed, I was struck by your reference to the fires burning in Baltimore and the postcards. So there are many other resources out there. They could be used in a variety of different ways in teaching. Can you speak a little more to the process and your vision for it?
Yeah, Judy, is that question coming from you?
Yes, it is.
Oh, thank you for that question, because I think in many ways it strikes at the heart of what I had envisioned when I thought about this project. And, this is my opportunity really to say once again, thank you to Saeed, because I came to him a couple of years ago now, not knowing exactly what this would be and what it would look like, and still most days not certain. But what I do know is that I wanted to be a part of creating something that really spoke to where particularly undergraduate, but I would even say graduate students are at this point in terms of how, I don't want to say how fast things move, but how dynamic, I guess that's a better way of talking about it and speaking to it, how dynamic life is around many people in terms of how they learn, in terms of digital technologies. And I say all that to say that I had, envisioned someone being and reading a digital book like this and deciding that they wanted to click on something within the book to get something that's related but something that, you know, if they're reading a traditional print publication, would need to pick up another book or go to a smartphone or a computer. But I wanted them to be able to do that right within that book. And so these books really, hopefully, will act as mini portals to a whole host of other materials and ideas about the Black press and about American society, that will allow students to, within the container of this book, to explore and learn about a whole host of things. And I just want to echo what Elizabeth says, is that this is one of the few, you know, projects, print and or digital, that really looks at the Black press as a topic and as a subject unto itself, without it just serving as a resource. So I want to thank the press also for recognizing that there is a dearth of work that looks at the Black press. And I guess the last thing I'll say is we're at a point where we have a lot of digitized material, digitized newspapers, and it's wonderful. But I wanted this project to start thinking about what the next step was. What do we do with all this digitized material? And I failed to mention that a lot of the material for these books come from newspaper databases like ProQuest and Accessible Archives. And while it's great for scholars to access this material, I think there's opportunities to create things using this material rather than just using it to create a book and cite sources and perhaps use some of the articles of the book, but actually take those digitized images and actually recreate something using those digital images. So I think the opportunities for teaching are vast. And I'm optimistic here. I hope these books, both in the digital form and the traditional print form, turn a profit. And it's been truly an educational process to think about, market and profit and all the things that I think scholars prefer not to. We just want to think about, creating scholarship. But I think it's necessary to think about those things as part of the publication process. And I definitely think, rather than circumscribing what I do and limiting what I do, I think it allows me to be more creative and be more, critical in thinking about all of those things.
Kim, thank you very much. I realize that we have run out of time, but I'd like to thank Kim and Saeed for organizing this, and Elizabeth for their creativity and for their generosity in sharing their experience with us. So please join me in thanking them.